I told him that when I was a kid, I would start to hear voices. And it was terrifying. It was really, really terrifying. So I would just lay in my bed with my kid's Bible underneath my pillow, and I would lay awake all night for about a year because there was just no safe place, you know? So I told Josh all of this and other things too. And eventually he told me, I believe that you have bipolar disorder.
Being a young adult is seen as a time when life is full of promise and possibility, but that isn't the case when you're dealing with your own or a loved one's mental illness. That's why Cheryl McGreeny and Bridget O'Shaughnessy are working to break down the stigma of mental illness and educate young people about it. We welcome Reverend McGreeny, clergy president of the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance of the Chicago Loop chapter, and the certified specialist as appointed by the Bishop Hee-Soo Jung of the Northern Illinois Conference of the United Methodist Church. And we welcome Bridget O'Shaughnessy, founder and director of the acting ensemble Erasing the Distance, which uses performance to spotlight mental health issues. And we also welcome Cheryl's son, John McGreeny, whose older brother committed suicide because of bipolar disorder. Welcome. Thank you all for joining me today.
Absolutely.
We're glad to be here.
Cheryl, let's start with you. Let's talk a little bit about Dan, and if we could just kick this all off by sharing Dan's story.
He started showing signs of depression and some bipolar disorder symptoms from about 6th grade on, and he worked with therapists and professionals, went to college, and at one point he came home and had more intense therapy, and he was doing well, he was doing great. He had moved back into his apartment, and he actually now had 2 colleges that he'd been accepted to, and he was trying to decide which school to go to. And on one day, it was June 6th, 2011, where we got the phone call, that Dan had taken his own life. And I have to say it was a complete shock, obviously, to parents, but also to his therapists and psychologists, because he had shown such hope and promise, in the future for his life, in the future. And that's how hidden and silent, the bipolar disorder and depression are. And I think especially with young adults, the stresses in their lives are just so intense normally, but add on to that, the struggles with bipolar disorder, it just is so painful and hidden. And we just miss him so terribly. But I think his story is one to be told about the young adult who has so much incredible stress that can lead to something like this.
Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Bridget, you're working to sort of rip the veil off of mental illness, especially in the young adult community. Can you share a little bit about what Erasing the Distance is all about?
Sure. So basically what we do is we gather real stories from people. So we sit down in an interview setting and people share their experiences with us. And it can be their own, or maybe their sister, or they're talking about their parents and how their mental illness has affected them. And we audio tape with their permission those interviews. And then we take their real words and we actually shape them into monologues, scenes, and full productions that our professional acting company brings to life. And it's really neat because, narrative has a way of really touching people on multiple levels. So it gets you thinking, but it also gets you feeling. It moves your spirit in a way that if I just gave you a brochure or a pamphlet, it probably wouldn't.
That's right.
Yeah. And we actually do a lot of work with young people. We go to middle schools, we go to high schools, we go to colleges, pretty much every college in the Chicagoland area we've gone to. And I think that's a really important population to talk to because mental illness starts to show up most often when people are about 14. Actually, 50% of people with mental illness have their first symptoms by 14, and 75% do by college age, 24. And so a lot of times, these are when the symptoms are first showing up, and we can help them identify it through the act of a story that they might be able to relate to.
John, it's been almost a year now since Dan's passing. How do you remember your brother?
Well, we were 15 months apart, and one story that kind of sticks out is when I was in high school, and one of his friends, we actually had a lot of the same friends, and some of my closest friends even today are, because of Dan. And we always joked around with each other. And I remember when Dan and one of his friends actually came into my room in the morning when I was sleeping, and they took me out and they actually gave me a swirly. And this is when I had long hair, so it just made it even, even better. But I was going through a bunch of photos of Dan when we were putting the poster boards together, and every single photo of him, there wasn't a picture you could find where he just wasn't smiling. And then I even remember at the funeral, someone who works at the Chicago Temple even mentioned to my parents that they've never seen so many people, packed in the church for any event. And that just really speaks to Dan's character. He was just friends with everyone.
Yeah.
Cheryl, we describe your son as someone who's smiling and loved by many. Why is mental illness such a stigma? Why do people feel like it needs to be hidden? Talk a little bit more about that.
Well, maybe I can share, from my own experience. I am a person with bipolar disorder, and I'm a clergy person, and a mother, of course, and a wife. And I showed symptoms of bipolar disorder all growing up, but they were never really recognized, as symptoms of bipolar disorder. And I actually had my diagnosis in my, in my mid-40s. And the telling of my story was like a freedom, a giving over. And when I saw Bridget with her first performance with Racing the Distance at Chicago Temple, and you came out and you invited people, to come and tell a story. And I have to say that I was, for a couple of months, I was like, "Oh, should I tell my story? Should I not tell my story? Should I?" I went back and forth, and I took a lot of courage. And I called you, and I said, I think I have a story maybe
to tell,
to share with you. When I went to your house, and of course, I was very nervous, and we didn't really know each other.
Yeah.
And when I came in, I just felt so welcomed, and so like it was a safe space. When you tell something so intimate about your life, it's important to feel safe. I mean, it really, really is. And that my story would be honored, and that my story was sacred.
Now I want to turn it over to John. John, you wrote a longer writing that we've kind of condensed for the show to kind of explain your feelings around your brother's death and how faith was a part of that healing.
Yes.
So would you be so kind as to share that with us?
Yes, of course. I would love to.
Great.
So it was cold and very windy. My brother was in a niche, which is what they called it, in a very nice courtyard. I didn't really know what to do at first, so I just started reading the passages from the Bible. I read the passages aloud, and then I knelt in the sun to pray. I am at peace with God's role in all of this. I felt my anger and distrust towards God and got through it. I have accepted that I still need to rely on God for my sanity and sobriety. Even if I am angry with God, I know that Dan is with me at all times in my heart, but this felt like he was physically near me. I was remembering a lot of the fun times we had together. I told him that I love him and miss him. I then felt like I needed to make another amends. The guilt was subtle, and I know that there wasn't anything I could have done. I said I was sorry for not being a better brother. Whether or not that was true, it was something I needed to get off my chest. On my walk back, I felt relieved, lighter, and warmer. The sun was still shining. One of Dan's favorite books was It's Not Easy Being Green by Jim Henson. This quote reminds me of Dan. Yeah, well, I've got a dream too, but it's about singing and dancing and making people happy. That's the kind of dream that gets better with the more people you share it with. From Kermit the Frog.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for letting us in on the kind of person that Dan was. We appreciate it. So Cheryl, Bridget, John, thank you for sharing your stories.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, a privilege.
I'm Leanne Nolan for Different Drummers and the Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries. Keep the faith.
I'm performing the story of April, and April is, she's a woman exactly my age, and and she's been struggling with bipolar disorder since I think she was a teenager. And it's very special to me because April actually was one of my childhood best friends.